Hey everybody, welcome to So What Do You Do Now? Tonight we're with Tony Cirone. Tony's got a good story to tell. I've known Tony for over 8 years.
First dad's meeting was September 2008.
That was your first dad's meeting. The first one I went to was January 2010, and I didn't know anything about Down syndrome. And at the time, I didn't even have a complete prenatal diagnosis. No. And Tony was magical in our experience because my wife and we had a prenatal diagnosis. They did a test. I went to work and Googled support groups locally, and I found the local dad's chapter. Went to a meeting, and there was probably 12, 15 guys there, and they all went around the room telling the stories about all the things they were dealing with. And about an hour into it, Tony points to me. He's like, "Hey, new guy, what's your story? How old's your kid?" And at that point, that's when I broke down, not knowing what to do. And you and all those guys embraced me and congratulated me on having a kid. So I wanted you to be one of the first people I talked to when I'm doing this whole endeavor. So Tony, thank you for taking the time. Thanks for having me in your home.
You're welcome.
And as you know, this is to help other people. So I wanted to sort of get the story out there. You have a young adult with Down syndrome?
Yes. My daughter is Julia, and Julia is 20 years old, and Julia has Down syndrome.
And when you guys found out that Julia had Down syndrome, give me that scenario.
My wife and I had been trying to have children for quite a while and had been struggling with some infertility issues. Actually had been working on an adoption and learned that Marielle was pregnant with Julia. Went through 8 months of normal pregnancy and ultrasounds, and everything seemed like it was going fine. In Marielle's 8th month, they did an ultrasound, and they found fluid in Julia's lungs. There's all the complications that come with the fluid in the lungs and what's causing this. And in her case, it was a heart issue. But the doctor also said that this could be a marker for something. So they did amniocentesis. I think that's the blood from the umbilical cord. That was Labor Day weekend. So I remember that was the longest weekend. I remember crying and praying, and because they told us the likelihood was going to be pretty high that there was something else going on. So after Labor Day weekend, the doctor called and gave us the diagnosis that Julia was going to have Down syndrome.
How does that conversation go?
So it was delivered over the phone. The doctor was a young, I don't even know if she was a resident fellowship, but she was very compassionate, and she knew we were very anxious to get this diagnosis. So she called and told Marielle over the phone, and it was just, I remember it was just crushing. Everything just stopped. And all we could think about was we're going to have this child, and she's going to be mentally disabled, and thought about all of our interactions with people with intellectual disabilities and just all negative.
What did you know about Down syndrome at that point?
So at that point in time, we really didn't know a lot about Down syndrome. We just knew it was intellectually, that there were going to be an intellectual disability, there was going to be physical disability, and we were also dealing with the diagnosis that my daughter was probably going to need heart surgery upon her birth. They said there was a 10% chance that she wouldn't even survive outside of the womb. Now, you got to remember, this is 20 years ago. So right. Back then, they weren't doing all the cardio that they were doing now. So Julia was born in a NIC unit at a children's hospital with probably 7 or 8 doctors in the room.
Was she early?
No, she went full term. So we had, between the diagnosis and the delivery, was 2-3 weeks. Everything happened very fast.
Once she was born, did she spend any time in the NICU, or was she come straight home?
So there's been a lot of miracles for Julia, and this is the first miracle, I guess you could say. The hole in her heart resolved itself. So there was no surgery, there was nothing that needed to be done, and there's a chance that happens. That happens with some kiddos. They come outside of the womb, and it resolves itself. Some kids, their lottery in life is they're going to need surgery, and Julia was fortunate.
Well, just a little VSD or what? I just know that because that's what Charlie had, and we were blessed as well for him to grow out of it.
Right. That's exactly what happened. So it resolved itself. It was never an issue. It was something that was monitored for a couple of years, and it never resulted in any issues for her. So the medical diagnosis, and again, not having any experience, and this is a child that we had wanted very badly for a very long time, and it was I just remember just being drained, just thinking, oh my God, why us? Why this child? How unfair this is all.
So what do you do when you're in that situation? Do you look for support? Where do you find it? How do you get involved?
So, there was a lot of darkness, and fortunately we had family that was supportive. And our physician told us about, that there are people, if you don't want to raise this child, there are people who would want to adopt this child. There are all sorts of families out here, and this is back in Indianapolis, that are dealing with this and have learned to move on.
So you're at a fork in the road. I mean, obviously you didn't put her up for adoption. You kept her and raised her. She's a beautiful young woman, and she's.
So I remember trying to find everything we could about Down syndrome and doing as much research as we could. I remember buying books the doctors provided and the geneticists. We met with the geneticist, and they provided all this medical information, but none of that was very comforting. All of that information was based on. A lot of it was based on old data.
And it's all statistics.
It's statistics.
There's nothing emotional in it. There's no support. It's just, hey, you have this chance of this chance of this.
That's right. Your child may be able to read, or your child may wear Depends for the rest of their life. Or, we just didn't see anything in the medical literature that was comforting.
So where did comfort come from?
Time. It took a lot of time. I remember thinking about Down syndrome all day, right? It would obsess me. We've got this child, she's got Down syndrome, what are we going to do? And then it was, I thought about Down syndrome a little bit that day. And then I thought about Down syndrome a couple times that day. And then in time, I got to know Julia, and I got to know my daughter. And it was no longer about the medical diagnosis. That's what I would tell people. That's probably the most important thing I would tell anybody is you're having a child, and your child is going to be more like any other infant at birth than at any other time that you're going to be around other kids. You're having a child. This child happens to have Down syndrome.
That is exactly what you and the rest of the guys reiterated to me in that first dads meeting. And I can't tell you how much that meant to me. Just to have a group of dads who'd been going through it and share the information that congratulations, you're having a boy, and it wasn't about Down syndrome. It was you're having a baby,
right?
And just that little bit right there that you just said, this almost I think verbatim what you guys had said to me at that first meeting, and that made such a difference to me. That made me realize that it's going to be okay.
Right.
I can't thank you guys enough for that.
And that's what I would tell everybody. It's going to be okay. It's not only going to be okay. You're going to enjoy raising that child. You're going to be proud of that child. You're going to accomplish things with that child, and I should say your child is going to accomplish things that they're going to make you proud. And they're going to have personality, and they're going to be a member of your family. One of the things that we did before Julia was born is we named her. I've got a large Catholic family, and my wife's family was praying, and we had these prayer chains going. And what do? You pray for unborn child Cirone with Down syndrome. So we named Julia before she was born. So she came into the world as a person, not as a diagnosis.
Yeah.
And before she was born, our families were praying for her as Julia. So I thought that was pretty powerful.
That's extremely powerful, and it shows the support that you guys had, at least within your family. So get me from Indy. When did you guys come?
Yeah.
To Indianapolis?
So we relocated out here when Julia was in third grade. I relocated out here with my employer for a job in finance. And so some of the most significant events, or I should say some of the things that have contributed to the success of Julia, the success of how this has all worked for our family. When Julia was born, her birth was celebrated. Relatives came, friends came, and it was not, oh, we're so sorry you've had a Downs baby. It was congratulations. And there was a huge party for her baptism. And there was just a lot of people around us who treated Julia's birth and Julia's milestones as celebrations. So, that was a game changer right there. This was not a tragedy when Julia was born. Family was there, and congratulations, and she's so beautiful. And baptism was a huge party for her, and more of the same. And she was baptized shortly after she was born. So I would say that was real important. I got involved in a support group, actually the first dad's chapter that was ever started back in Indianapolis, and I made some great friendships there. And I remember being at a dad's meeting, and we were talking about transitioning, and my daughter was going to have to transition into an elementary school. And there were 5 elementary schools near my home, and they were going to have my daughter go to an elementary school that was for EC kids. It was probably about an hour, maybe 45 minutes away, maybe an hour altogether in the bus. So I'm at a dad's meeting, and I'm talking to Joe Mears, who actually founded the group.
Before you get into it, to explain what dads is, because you and I know what dads is, but for...
So dads it's a support group for fathers who have children with Down syndrome. And dads was born out of this need that men have to receive support, but it recognized that men are not wired the same way as women. So you'd have a parent meeting, and there'd be 25 women and there'd be 2 guys in the basement of a church. Well, where are the other 23 men? So a small group of men got together one day for drinks at a local pub, and we all had children with Downs. And there were 3 of us, and the next time we got together, there were 5 of us, and the next time we got together, there were 7 of us. So the numbers just kept growing, and Joe Mears, the guy who kind of put this together, saw this need and started it. Joe went to our parent organization, also went to a couple other people in the community, and started up a nonprofit, Dads Appreciating Down Syndrome. And it was monstrously successful. And what it did is it took all the things the needs that we had, but it addressed them in a bar. Burgers.
That's great.
And beer, and you'd bring in an attorney to talk about special ed. You'd bring in somebody, a speech therapist, or you'd bring in somebody to talk about special needs planning. What it did is it recognized that these men all had the need to get information and support, but it was a very unique environment where it wasn't the basement of a church, and it's meeting people at the well.
Right.
So meeting them where their needs are. So in meeting Joe Mears and some of the other guys and dads and learning how to become an advocate, I was talking about how my daughter was going to be starting elementary school, and the school district that they were trying to put us in was a school that was furthest away from the house in an EC setting.
Yeah, explain EC.
Exceptional children, meaning special ed. So the school that they had selected was a school for children with intellectual disabilities. And Julia would have been in a closed classroom most of her day. And she may have seen peers or been with peers some part of her day, but she wasn't going to be going to a local neighborhood school.
So she gets bussed off. The plan was for them to bus her off somewhere else to be in a classroom with other kids that are the same.
Other kids with intellectual disabilities, that's right.
The opposite of inclusion.
It was not going to be inclusive. She was not going to be around peers that she would know. She was going to spend a great deal of time getting transported to and from the school. So I'm at this dad's meeting, and I'm sharing this information with the other dads, and I'm saying, the schools, they want this and they want that, and of course they're psychologists, they've got master's degrees, they've got doctorate degrees, and they're smarter than me, and they're smarter than Marielle, and I'm thinking, is this they're the ones who are the smartest people in the room, but this just doesn't sound right. And I'm thinking, I don't like this. I don't want this for my daughter. And my friend Joe says, well, here's what you're going to tell him, Tony. He says, you're going to ask for an attendant to ride that bus with Julia. Because if she's on the bus, for 45 minutes or an hour, she's going to need an attendant. And that bus is going to have to stop so she can go to the bathroom so she doesn't soil herself. And you're going to ask him for $1 million, and you're going to ask him to take all the vowels out of the alphabet.
That sounds like Joe.
Yeah. Typical advice you'd get from a dad's meeting. So I'm like, got it. I got it. He's like, you don't sign a thing. You don't sign anything you don't want to sign. You don't have to take this placement if you don't want this placement. And that was so empowering. I was thinking to myself, I don't have to go along with what they're saying. I can object to this. He's like, oh man, yeah. And Julie ended up being placed in our local school district, and she just flourished. She was going to school with kids from the neighborhood, kids that she knew from church, people that we knew. And for the most part, she was in a very inclusive environment in the school. She had some pull-out time. She had resource teacher that went along with her during her school day. But I'll never forget the power that I felt when I was told, no, hell no, you're not going along with that. You don't sign that. This is what you do. $1 million, an attendant on the bus. She's not going to use any vowels. You're going to give her a special alphabet.
So did you ask for all of that? Did you go through with Joe's advice, or how did it go?
The attendant on the bus. That was, and they realized that weren't going to do that. Well, if she's going to be on the bus for that long, then who's going to ride the bus with her?
So you filtered Joe's information and asked for the realistic thing. So I think that's a good point. Having our own struggles with the school system and having to fight and advocate for your kid, that's good advice. So tell me about that, how long that took. Was it just you go to an IEP and the school says, we want you to send her to the other side of Indiana, and you say, no, okay, great, I'll have an attendant ride the bus. And they go, okay, no, we'll send you to the homeschool. Yeah, it didn't happen like that, I'm sure.
No, so it was a process, but it was not a hard process. If she's going to go to the school, then here's what you're going to need to do. But that's not the placement we want. We want her to be placed locally, and that's the placement they made. Local placement.
Was there resistance? Was there struggle? Was it? Did you do it all on your own?
We did it on our own. There really wasn't a lot of resistance. We were kind of schooled in how to ask and how to do it. And I think the school knew that if they didn't make the placement that we wanted, then it was going to get harder and harder and more difficult for them.
So that's a common struggle that you've had to go through, that I've had to go through, that other parents in dealing with the school system is butting heads and we want to do this. And I think a lot of folks will roll over. Like you said, they're doctors, they have master's degrees, they're some smartest people in the room.
It's very intimidating. And supposedly they're looking out for the best interest of your child. They're all people. At the end of the day, they're all people, and they have these children, Julia and Charlie. They don't know them personally. It's a file. It's too many students with too many needs that they can't address. So it's natural that they're going to look for the easiest solution they can come up with. Not that they're bad people or they want something bad for your child. They're looking for an easy solution. So when they see this diagnosis of Down syndrome or any other intellectual disability, they're thinking special ed, closed classroom, because otherwise, to accommodate this child is a lot more work. And we don't have the resources or the money. But guess what? It's the law, and they have to do it. Taking a step back and looking at this situation and how it was addressed, it's really getting Julia into the right school placement. It's about advocacy.
Right.
You have to advocate for your child, whether it's the school or it's a medical procedure or you're trying to get her into a program or him into a program that's local. It's about being your child's best advocate. And unfortunately, our children can't speak for themselves. And so you have to do it for them.
Well, and I've seen, at least when we've had struggles with IEPs, there's been other parents, at least in the local community here, that have offered up and have gone to meetings with us that have helped and we've learned from. And I've been to a couple of IEPs with some other parents, and it's the community and the Down syndrome community, folks, they really, you want to help other people. And I think that having somebody like Joe steer you down the path of, you need $1 million, you need to take all the vowels out, and you need somebody on the bus.
Right.
You got to water down Joe's advice a little bit, but it's valuable.
It was very valuable, and it told me you don't have to take it, you don't have to sign up for it, you don't have to go along, and you're going to negotiate, and it worked, and it worked well. So Indianapolis, so that was one of the milestones that we dealt with in Indianapolis. But I think it's a really common struggle that you're going to have raising a child with Down syndrome.
Yeah.
You're just, unfortunately, it's something that it's a challenge, and I'm not saying it's going to always be there, and maybe it gets easier and easier, but it's something that you're going to have to be involved with.
And you mentioned the law. The law you're talking about is federal law, correct?
Right. Yes.
So what happened in Indiana and what happens in North Carolina, and if someone's listening in Seattle or California
Kentucky, or wherever you're at,
whatever state you're in, the federal law, ABLE.
Yeah, the ABLE Act.
The ABLE Act, it's a federal law, so they have to follow it. And I think that's the key, at least for us, is when we've been had those struggles, is bringing that book to the IEP meeting with the rights law, and laying it on the table and going through, dog-earing some pages, putting some Post-its in it.
Like you said, there's lots of parents wherever you live who've dealt with this before. And these laws that protect our children are universal. So it doesn't matter if you're in Kentucky or Indiana or North Carolina, your child's going to have protections under the law, and you're going to have to know how to use some of these laws to make sure your child is getting everything that they're supposed to get from the school system.
Yeah, that's key. When we learned that, it made all the difference, because it allowed us to be an effective advocate. Because like what you touched on, when you go in and you feel intimidated, you're sitting down at an IEP. And one of the things for me that I've learned in talking to doing plenty of IEPs, is that some parents don't even go to the IEP.
No, they don't. As a matter of fact, you'll look at an IEP schedule and they'll have you scheduled for an hour and a half. Or maybe if it's just a small change, it's less than that. And these teachers and administrators are so accustomed to doing these meetings without a parent being present that when you go to an IEP, Jeremy, or if I go individual education plan, that's what IEP stands for, individual education plan, and these are the plans that the public schools use to provide our children with the resources that they need to accomplish their goals. So the school will set a meeting and it'll be for a ridiculously short amount of time, an hour and a half. Most parents aren't going to these IEPs. These teachers, again, they've got more in their day than they can possibly get done. They've got limited resources. They're not getting paid anything, to do this stuff. So they're underpaid. They're overworked. They don't know Charlie. They don't know Julia. They just want to move on.
Right.
So you go to an IEP meeting that's scheduled for an hour and a half, and you need 3 hours or 4 hours. So I'm the first person to tell them, we don't have enough time planned. Or look at the clock and say, well, when are we going to come back? We're only on page 3. Okay, well, that's okay. I know we got another 8 pages. I'll take it home. I'll review it. When do you want to come back and meet?
Yeah, because it's the law.
It's the law.
They have to make the time.
And you have to, as a parent, you have to take it seriously too.
Yeah, and I think that knowing the law, because I feel like it's almost like there's a gray area where some folks end up going off the deep end and they ask for things that aren't realistic.
Sure.
Maybe Joe with $1 million.
Right.
But you've got, as long as you study up the law and you're educated in what's actually legal by law that they're supposed to provide, you've got a good argument and a good foundation to be an advocate for your child.
Sure. And you want your child to succeed. So I went, now Julia knows how to swim. But when she was learning how to swim, I wouldn't drop her off in 10 feet of water and expect her to just learn it. So some parents push for things that maybe they're doing it and put them in an environment they're not ready for,
right?
Or they're not being realistic. So
yes.
I've always said I'm very realistic. I've done very well with our daughter's teachers and administrators because I don't ask for things that are reasonable, and I don't ask for anything that's not the law. And again, the end result is we want Julia to succeed,
yes,
no matter where she's at. So I'm not going to say put her in calculus if she can't do calculus. If they tell me for her to get her diploma, she needs to pass algebra, then honey, I don't care how you do it. We're going to get a tutor and you're going to pass algebra. And they said you just have to pass. So let's not worry about it. Let's worry about the consumer math, how to use your money, how to count change. And the school says you got to have algebra. Well, let's get you a tutor and let's just get you to pass algebra. Let's do whatever we need to do and move on.
Did you have to do that?
That we did that.
Yeah. She passed algebra?
Julia has a diploma from Providence High School. North Carolina law requires that she take 2 years, I think it's 2 years of math, but yeah, so she had to take algebra.
Oh, that's great.
So it was algebra in a different setting, but it was the same material that all the other kids had to take. So they made some accommodations, but she passed algebra.
Oh, that's awesome. I hated algebra.
I hated it.
Oh my God. I remember telling my algebra teacher, I'm never going to use this. I use it all the time.
Yeah.
What's brain exercises? I mean, it's the mental
math. I think the universal part of it, we all start out with this diagnosis, this medical diagnosis, no matter how you get it. And we're having a medical condition. We're having a Down syndrome. You're not having a baby. It's
right.
a Down syndrome.
Right.
And it scares the shit out of you because you're thinking about Julia could have this hole in her heart, and Julia may never be able to read, and Julia may never be able to communicate, and you're thinking about all these things, and it's based on old research, and it's based on experiences that you've never had. You don't know anyone with Down syndrome. You don't know what your future is going to hold. So it's like I was saying, so you're thinking about Down syndrome, and then a little bit of time goes on and you get to know your child, and maybe you didn't think about Down syndrome all day today. Maybe you only thought about it 3 times or 4
right.
times, but eventually life goes on. Things get better. But that's the commonality about the shared reaction to the medical part. But it does. It gets better. It gets better and better and better in time.
So that's the thing that I keep hearing from folks is the patience. It gets better. Don't freak out. Take it day by day.
You're having a child. You're not having a medical condition. The medical information is great in a way, so you know what to expect. As your children get older, the medical stuff becomes less important. So in the beginning, we have all these shared medical conditions that our kids have because they have Downs. And it may be heart, it may be thyroid, it may be orthodontics, who knows, but it's this shared commonality. And as your kids get older, it's not going to be the medical anymore. It's going to be what we're doing in the schools and how we advocate in the schools. And then it's going to be baseball and dancing and swimming and the volunteer work that they do. So you're having a child, you're not having a medical condition, all these wonderful things to look forward to, all these accomplishments that your child is going to achieve, that you're going to get to share and be part of.
And it goes by fast.
And it goes by in the blink of an eye.
That's the hard part. It's like, oh my God. It's like they get big so quick.
Julia's 20. Julia's taking a bus to work.
Tell me about that. Tell me about her. She's working now.
Right.
What's the job?
Julia's had employment since she was 16, and she worked for the YMCA in their summer camp program in aquatics. There was a woman that worked in aquatics. She worked with children with special needs. So she had a soft heart for kids with special needs. Actually, Julia went and spent a summer there as a volunteer, and she needed community hours for her high school diploma. So she got her community hours at the Y, and the YMCA, her supervisor said, Julia did better than some of my paid staff. I said, well, that's great because she's going to be looking for a job. So next year, I'm going to have her apply for the paid position. So Julia got on with the YMCA in a paid position position, I want to say, in 2015. And she worked for them for 3 summers. And then they hired her part-time to work in their aquatics department. But the position that they gave her and the time slots that she was working just didn't work. When she was working in the summer camp, she was working with kids. She was helping with all the kids in the summer camp program. So she was helping with carpool, and she was helping with lunches, and she was giving out life jackets and helping with crafting. And I mean, busy, exhausting, but definitely using all of her abilities. The position that opened up for her after the summer was a slide operator. So it was wonderful that the Y would bring her in as a regular part-time employee, but sitting on a chair at the bottom of a slide, telling somebody it's their turn or they're not their turn during the middle of the week when there's no children showing up was not very fulfilling. So Julia is now working in a retail store. It's a consignment store called the Clothes Mentor. And the Clothes Mentor is a store that resells women's fashion merchandise. The owners of the stores out here had been involved in our summer camp programs, and they contacted me through a member of the dads group. And they said, we're going to create these positions in our stores, and we're looking for teenagers, young adults who might be able to fill them. And I have the connection in our parent organization with these older kids, just because my daughter's the oldest, and I'm probably one of the older parents who still stay in the organization with an older child. So anyway, I was contacted, and somebody said they're going to be creating these positions, and they're looking for somebody like Julia. And I said, are you kidding? How about Julia? This would be great for Julia. So Julia interviewed for this position in the store as a greeter, and the position has grown into a little bit more than that. She works in a consignment store. She greets shoppers as they come in the store. She shows them around the store. As they shop, she will give them a basket and encourage them to make more purchases. So, and who's going to say no?
Right.
Would you like a basket that you could fill up with more purchases? So the owners of the store have said she has done phenomenal, and their sales have increased. And, and the shifts that who could say no?
Right.
Why buy one thing when Julia's going to hand you a basket and show you where the shoes are, and now you can buy 3?
Yeah.
But she loves it. She loves the interaction with the customers. She loves the fulfillment of working and having a paycheck.
How's she getting back and forth?
So Julia takes a bus to and from work. The city has a special transportation bus, and Julia arranges her pickup and her drop-off, and she does all of that on her own. She pays for the bus tickets with her own money. Her money is direct deposited into her account. She buys things from the store that she likes sometimes. Our problem, or I should say Julia's problem, is she likes to save her money, so she needs to be reminded to spend her account down so that she can maintain eligibility for some of the assistance that she gets.
I think that's a key thing too, is that because I had to explain to my mom when she was figuring out wills and that sort of stuff, I said, you can't leave anything to Charlie.
Most of our children are going to probably be eligible for Social Security, supplemental Social Security income, and Medicaid, but the restrictions are very draconian. And I mean, really, it's not a program that you're supposed to live off of. It's a program that's supposed to provide some assistance. In Julia's case, as she earns income, her benefits are decreased, which is fine. That's fine. If they decrease her benefit because she's making $500 a month and they have to decrease her benefit, that's fine. The important thing about the work is it gives her pride. It puts her in the community. It's meaningful to her. Julia working in the private sector is just phenomenal. And the same thing with the Y. I mean, the interaction that she would have with these kids, the relationships that she's forming with her coworkers, it's just a great example that people with different abilities belong in the community. Yeah. And I think people see her and they see that she's contributing. Coworkers, I mean, one day one of her coworkers may have a diagnosis of Down syndrome, or maybe one of their girlfriends, or maybe one of these parents that ran into her at the Y, and now they're in a position to make a hire. They're in a position to advise a friend or a neighbor, and they say, there's this young woman that we used to see in the program at the Y. Or, there's this young lady at the Clothes Mentor, and she's so pleasant and she's so helpful, and she has Down syndrome. Wow.
And that's an afterthought.
And it's an afterthought.
That's the kind of what we struggle with when we have the discussions with the school system, is about the inclusion piece of it. Because the argument we always say is that society is inclusive. So having them be included in the school, it's a good argument. I mean, it's like when you get out of school, if you've been stuck in a room and you're over here and no one talks to you and you're not in with everybody else, no one's learning. No one's learning about diversity and people with different needs and just different people. So
we don't have a Down syndrome Harris Teeter or a Down syndrome Walgreens or a special park for people with Down syndrome.
Right.
We're all in the community.
We're all in this together.
One of the things I always think about, more alike than different, right? So one of the examples I can give you is I still remember this probably happened when Julia was 10 or 12. I was having dinner with my 3 kids, Julia, who was probably maybe 10 at that time, Kristen, who was 6, and Ted, who was 4. So, Ted being the boy in the family, I mean, he's rambunctious and he's teasing and he's being a handful. And I was managing this all by myself and it wasn't going well. And Julia had finally had enough of Ted and she throws her plate on the table and she says, "That's it, Teddy. I have had enough of you. I am going away." She stomps off and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is just what a freaking nightmare. and I try to explain to Ted and Kristen, I said, some things are they're harder for your sister. Kristen says, "I know, Dad, it's because she has Down syndrome." Oh my God, here we're going to have the Down syndrome conversation with my 6-year-old. I'm not ready for this. And I said, "How long have you known that Julia's different?" "Oh, Daddy, I've known for a long time. Julia's different." I'm like, "Well, tell me how she's different, Kristen." And Kristen says, "Well, Julia likes chocolate ice cream, and I like vanilla ice cream. Julia likes to play games, and I like to play with dolls. Julia's favorite color is pink, and my favorite color is purple." And I'm like, oh my God, Down syndrome was the last thing on this kid's list. I still have this list. I wrote it down shortly after she said it, and it's probably the 12th or 13th thing on Kristen's list.
It had nothing to do with Down syndrome.
It had nothing to do with Down syndrome.
And that's the beautiful part about kids is the honesty.
Yeah, that's right. It was just shocking. Oh my God, are you kidding me? Yeah, she's totally different, Dad.
So you didn't have the conversation.
No, that was the conversation.
That was it? I never got into it again about it?
No, I mean, it's come up time to time, but never like that. That was the conversation.
Oh, that's great.
But you celebrate what you have, and you celebrate how wonderful these kids are. I mean, Julia she's the most loving, warm person you will ever meet. She walks into a room and the room lights up. She's friendly and she's outgoing and she's always smiling and she's persistent. And she has a lot of impact on people.
Well, I think the world of her. I mean, I've just in the 8 years that I've known you, I've seen her grow up. I mean, I've just seen her today when I got here. I was like, oh my God, she's a young lady.
She's a young 20. Lady, right? What are you doing? Well, I'm working tomorrow and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And Julia does some volunteer work. So Julia volunteers at her church and she works in the nursery. So she's been working with kids in a nursery room setting for 4 or 5 years. She's also done some volunteer work for the Down Syndrome Association. So at Buddy Walk, she's helped with registration and other events she's helped. Recently, she got involved with Gigi's Playhouse. Mm-hmm. And Gigi's Playhouse is trying to open up a site here in Charlotte. And Julia was selected to be an intern. So Julia has gone with the team from Gigi's Playhouse, and she's gone to local businesses and nonprofits, and she's given her little elevator speech, and she's helped them make their pitch for Gigi's Playhouse, and loves it. About a month ago, she was out with one of our state legislatures up in Denver, North Carolina, talking to students who wanted to go into special ed and talking with special ed teachers and spending the day with the legislature. And I mean, she was a fill-in. It was the day before he was supposed to come out here, and he's got an intern with Down syndrome. She couldn't make it. Somebody mentioned Julia, and game on. 24 hours notice, she's at the school meeting the congressman. If you'd seen them pictured together, you would have thought they'd known each other for years.
Bradford.
Yeah,
I want to try to get him too, because I have a couple people who've had great stories about him and everything he's doing up in Raleigh. So
somebody paid it forward for me. I'm a big advocate of paying it forward. So if it hadn't been Joe Mears and Kerry Sell and these other men that I met in Indianapolis at a dad's meeting, it affected me. They knew other people who'd come before them. And, the whole idea of getting this dad's group started here in Charlotte, to help other people, to help other families who are going forward. So I'm just trying to pay it forward. One day somebody's going to listen to this. They're going to get past that diagnosis that we talked about, and they're going to get past all the craziness, and they're going to get involved, and they're going to get passionate about something, and they're going to find a way to pay it forward for somebody else.
Well, Tony, I do appreciate the time
You're welcome.
and the story and everything that you've done for not only the community, but for myself, as you have made a huge impact on me. And again, I thank you for that. This is a great episode. We'll see you around.
Thank you, Jeremy.